Hey Ben, thanks for coming in to talk about assessment today. There are lots of things we need to consider when we're creating tests. What are some of those main considerations?
Well, the three key areas are validity, reliability, and practicality. So validity is, are the tests that we're using testing what they should be testing?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So for example, if you're testing a reading skill,
Mm-hmm.
that test is testing that specific reading skill and nothing else,
Mm-hmm.
not writing or anything else. If you're looking at reliability, we're looking at two areas of reliability. One is the questions. So can those questions be guessed? So for example, if it's a multiple choice question, there's an element, you could possibly guess them, whereas an open question is less likely to be, you can't really guess it.
Okay.
And then we're looking at reliability in terms of the examiners. Are they marking consistently? So are all the examiners that are involved in the test using the same criteria and applying the same criteria when they mark exams? Then the third factor is practicality. And practicality is looking at how practical the exams are in terms of financially and in terms of time. So are these exams going to cost a lot of money to administer and mark, and how much time they're going to take to administer and mark?
Okay, so validity, reliability, which within that is to do with questions and the examiners or the markers, and practicality.
That's right.
All right. Let's focus a bit more in on validity. I mean, it strikes me as something that should be quite easy to assess what you want to assess if you're writing a test.
It actually isn't as easy as some people might think. It can be quite difficult because sometimes there is the possibility that what you're going to be testing are some other skills in addition. And you might, for example, have a question which you want to assess the learner's use of the past simple,
Mm-hmm.
but there might also be a need for them to use present perfect as well. And that wouldn't be a very valid test because those students who might need to use the present perfect struggle and realise that maybe it's wrong and might struggle with that particular question. Whereas also another problem with validity is it's how you test things. So for example, if you're testing somebody's ability to deliver a presentation and you ask them to write it out,
Mm-hmm.
okay, they might write out a very good presentation, but it doesn't necessarily mean that their actual oral presentation skills are very good as well. So we're looking at the content, we're looking at the construct as well.
So another example might be if you want to assess how well someone can bake a cake. You don't get someone to write an essay about it,
Exactly.
You get them to actually bake a cake.
Exactly that.
And hopefully eat it as well if it's a good cake.
Yes, yes.
All right. And the same, thinking about a skills-based process like that, if you're assessing teaching, you want to assess teaching through observing teaching rather than essays about teaching, let's say.
Yes.
Okay.
So just to give you an example here, we have a question which says, who has worked at the company the longest? And they have a number of different tenses here, but in order to answer this question, it's not really a case of understanding the different tenses. It's actually your numeracy skills, that's what's being assessed here. And if you want to test numeracy, then you give them a numeracy exam. But if you want to test tenses, you need to look at ways where students are going to have to be able to use those tenses. So you need to be very, very careful when writing questions, to think about, are any other skills being assessed here?
So really having a really thorough knowledge or thorough understanding of the question, the test item, not using skills or knowledge which are beyond the student, and that it's just focusing on that one thing.
Exactly.
It reminds me of what my teacher trainers used to tell me when I was doing my cert TESOL, which is about when asking check questions, and that you shouldn't use language higher than the student's level, or you shouldn't be testing, you have a check question which used that target language, because then that would be assessing other things.
Exactly that, yes. So, with concept check questions, make sure that they are using language which is at that level or below, and they're clear, and basically they are checking understanding.
Okay, so a lot of things to consider for validity, so not quite so straightforward. So think about that, the questions then, the questions that teachers or might use, and the reliability of questions, which you mentioned. Tell me a little bit more about that.
So there are a number of different types of questions that teachers, that examiners can use when they're, item writers can use when they're writing exams. So, for example, you can have a true-false question, you can have a multiple-choice question, you can have an open-close question. 3 examples. With the true-false question, if the candidate doesn't know, they could take a guess and have a 50-50 chance of getting it right. Some exams have introduced a not given. So, for example, it could be a reading text, and it could be, is this statement true, false, or it's not given in the text. But then you still have a 33% chance of guessing. A lot of exams use multiple choice, and very often there's 1 correct answer and 3 distractors. It is possible, and I have seen examples where there have been more than 1 correct answer, but very often the standard is to have one right answer, 3 distractors. But the problem is with that as well, is very often it's hard to come up with 3 good distractors. So quite often one of the distractors probably won't work as well, and not many candidates will choose that. But even then, you've still got approximately a 25% chance of guessing the answer.
And I guess that kind of multiple choice question would only work well where there is only one definitive answer, and in many cases, in many tests, there are lots of other possible options that students could do. So multiple choice isn't always necessarily the best type of test.
No, and multiple choice and these true-false questions, they're testing receptive skills, because students only need to circle the correct answer. They're not actually producing any language. So with an open question, okay, then students need to actually produce language. So it could be explain why so-and-so did this action, and then that way they have to actually write something, they actually are producing it. They can't guess it. They don't know the answer, they can't really guess it.
Yeah, I remember as a student, it was, multiple choice answers could be done very quickly, but it was the open answer questions which were a lot more difficult to do. But I guess then thinking about the writing of the questions, as you said, it's very hard to write good distractors.
Yes.
But although it's hard to write the question, marking it is very straightforward. Conversely, making an open answer question, why did somebody do X? It's easy to do that, but then because a candidate is producing far more language, the response is much bigger, then that's open to much more subjectivity.
Yes, and we'll come to that when we talk about practicality. So, that's a factor that you need to think about, is with an open question, it is going to take more time for the marker.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about the marker. You mentioned reliability with examiners or markers.
Yes.
If, let's say with an open question, you've got a wide variety of types of responses, it's going to be quite difficult then to standardise that examiner, or for them to be able to mark that objectively, I would imagine.
It is, and that's why it's very, very important for examiners to be trained and to know that they know the criteria, and they're applying that criteria in the same way as everybody else. And that's why very often examining boards will have standardisations where before an examiner can actually do live marking of real exams, they have to pass a standardisation test where they are given a number of exams to look at and mark them. And if they don't meet that, they're not marking according to the criteria, then they're retrained and they'll do a second standardisation. But even then, you might have examiners that are very good and they're pretty good in terms of they're marking the same way. You can still have issues with what's called intra-rater reliability, and that could be where an examiner, maybe one day he's in a good mood and he's quite generous, and the next day he wakes up, he's in a foul mood, he's maybe not so generous. So there are also ways that you can actually avoid that. So for example, it could be double marking, which is quite often used for written assignments.
Okay, and I suppose that that's only really a problem with exams where you've got one exam which is marked by multiple people. So let's say a national type school leavers exam where you're going to have thousands of markers possibly hundreds of markers, and they all need to be standardised. But taking it back to a classroom level, for a teacher preparing an end of week test, progress test, then they're making it, they're marking it, no one else is marking it.
Right.
That's not going to be a problem, apart from maybe the intra rate of reliability, where if their mood changes between marking, maybe that's the only time there might be a problem.
But it's unlikely there, because very often they'll mark everybody's in one go. And that's where we're looking at, when we're looking at classroom tests where a teacher's marking for their particular class, they're looking at the practicality issues.
Let's talk about practicality, because again I remember when I was teaching, making progress tests, and I'd have a mix of types of question, and the long answer questions were the ones which always took most time to mark, and you know, it takes a lot of time to mark tests.
It does, and what we're looking at when it comes to practicality is how much time it takes, and also the money required. So if you have a test where you have examiners that are needed to go to the centre and mark it, it's going to cost money. And if these are open questions that need more time marking, again, it's going to be quite expensive. So in order to have to reduce the practicality, very often people will use questions which are very objective, either multiple choice or true or false, where these can be marked using a computer. But they are not always, we mentioned reliability earlier, but they're not always going to be that reliable. And sometimes you need to have open questions because you want to get certain information.
And I suppose you can link in validity here that it will depend on what it is you're assessing. So
Exactly.
Going back to our teaching practice example of teaching, you ideally need someone in the room watching you. You can't just have a true-false exam paper on how to teach. It might be a lot cheaper, but it's not going to be a valid assessment, or as valid.
Yes, and when it comes to things like speaking, for example, you know, teachers might think, well, how do I get a valid speaking assessment? And you know, if you've got 20 students in your class, can you get them to all 20 to, you know, to interview all 20 students? It would be very, very difficult in practical terms. But what you can do is you can get them to work in groups, and you can get them to do mini presentations, and you can use that.
So group presentations to assess that.
Yeah, so you have them 5 groups of 4, each group doing a presentation, and they might have to present different, you know, each have a minute or 2 to present on a certain subject within their group, and you assess them individually there.
All right, some nice considerations there. Thank you very much.
Thank you.